Hey everybody, today I'm taking a look at Whirling Witchcraft, which is a board game designed by Eric Anderson Sundin and published by AEG. This one accommodates 2 to 5 players and takes around 30 minutes to play on average. This is very much a family weight style game that looks like this when it's on the table, where each player has their own personal player board and they have their own cauldron. You're going to have some communal resources such as all these cubes, which all correspond to a different ingredient that you might find in a witch's cauldron, such as these black hearts, these mandrakes, these mushrooms, these spiders and these frogs. There's also going to be a big deck of cards here which you're going to be drafting from as the game plays on. And each player is also going to have their own personal card here, which you can use these novices or these initiates here as a general basic setup, but you have got some variability if you want to try some different powers. Now, the objective of this game is quite strange, where you want to be trying to overflow the cauldron of the person sitting to the right of you, and we'll explain how that works in the gameplay. So the first thing you're going to do in a player's turn is that everybody is going to get given 4 of these cards, and then simultaneously you're going to pick one of those cards together. So let's say I picked this one here. I'll put it face down, and once everybody else has picked from their set of 4 cards, we'll reveal them all together like so. So let's say after 3 rounds of drafting, I'm going to end up with these cards here. Now the idea is that I'm trying to convert resources, or these cubes, from my personal player board into other resources that I'm going to give to my opponent. Because if I ever have too many of these resources, overflowing these spots, then they're going to basically go onto my opponent's board here, and if they ever have 5 of those, they're going to automatically win. So you want to be keeping these down as low as possible. And the way you do that is you're going to be allocating these cubes onto these different cards. So let's say I put this mandrake token on here, I put this blue spider token on here, that will automatically convert it into a white and either a red or a green. So let's say I took a white from the common supply, like so, and I also take a green from the common supply. Now I can either choose to put those straight into the cauldron, which will get passed to my opponent and then go onto their workshop, again with the idea of trying to make it overflow, or I can actually use that to trigger another card. So I can actually use this one to go onto this one here and convert it into 2 additional red ones. Again, all with the idea of trying to overwhelm my opponent with cubes so they can't stop it from overflowing. And you can do this as many times as you want, as long as you have the resources to pay for it. So again, I could put these on here, put another red one on here to convert it into 2 greens and a blue, like so. Now all the cubes that I converted are going to go into the cauldron like this, and then again that's going to get passed to the opponent on your right hand side. So I've only got a 2-player game here, so we're actually going to swap. But I've not done this, players, but you get the gist. They're going to swap directly to the person to your right. But again, in a 2-player, it's just going to go back and forth. And then all those ingredients are going to go into the workbench of that player, like so. And as you can see, as the game goes on, you might want to start tailoring towards certain strategies because your opponent might be finding it difficult to manage a particular resource. And any resources that you spent to actually convert to others just go back into the general supply so that you don't have to worry about them anymore. And that is basically how the game plays until someone is so overwhelmed that they cannot fight off the 5 resources that they need to win. So let's say, for example, this player had a full run of greens like that. They ended up taking more. They go into this area here, which also they go into the person who's given the cauldron to that player there. And if they ever collect 5 of those, then they're going to win instantly. There is an additional consideration you need to make when drafting these cards, because as you can see at the top of each card, you have these symbols corresponding to this little Arcana card here. And whenever you collect symbols of that type, you are going to go, or when you get to an even number, so there's 2, 4 or 6, you're going to get a special ability. And those abilities are quite simple. So first off, the book one here lets you take ingredients as if you had them on your player board and fulfill these recipes. You've got this cauldron here where you literally just get to chuck any cube you want into your cauldron to try and throw your opponent under the bus. And this final one here just lets you remove any 2 resources you want from your workbench. So that's essentially how the gameplay is going to work. If nobody wins in a particular round, you're going to draw back up to 4 cards, draft a new card, and then pass those cards to the player on your left. So let's get on to some final thoughts on Whirling Witchcraft. So first off, gameplay-wise, this is pretty much as simple as it gets, but it does have at least some degree of engine building here, or this kind of conversion trees, which I quite like. You know, you can convert these goods into these goods, and then those goods into these goods. So it has got that, again, that branching off engine builder style manner where you can end up duplicating and just expanding and multiplying the cubes that you're putting, all with the idea of overwhelming your opponent by putting them into their cauldron. And you do have an idea of what they might be suffering with. You know, because if they've got a whole row here of greens, then you might want to really focus on getting those greens to try and get that win. I will say that I did find the luck of the cards in this game quite a significant factor, because yeah, although you have a choice of 4 cards at any time when you're drafting one, I did find myself on more than one occasion, you know, if I'm really struggling with a certain resource and I didn't draw the card that I needed to get rid of that resource, then I'm pretty much done for. There's nothing you can do about it. I do like the flexibility of some of these cards. You know, when you draft them, you can choose to orientate them any way you want, but they are going to be locked in that way for the rest of the game. But, you know, if you're particularly struggling on a particular type, then you do have the option of rotating it to what suits you. Additionally, you do have that kind of tool in your back pocket that you can use. You know, if you're really struggling with one, if you focus on these raven symbols, then you might be able to, you know, dilute your workbench down on that particular resource type. So you do have some options there, but it did come into play more than once where I had no options whatsoever in order to mitigate my cauldron or from my workbench being overloaded, and it just worked out that way because of the cards I drew. I actually do quite appreciate the approach this game has gone for. You know, with a very alternate victory condition, you're trying to overwhelm your opponent's cauldron. I've never seen that done before. You're simply trying to force one player into losing, essentially, although you're essentially winning by overwhelming them, but you are essentially trying to make it as difficult as you can for one particular person, because you are only ever interacting with, you know, the person to your left or right, you know, left in terms of the drafting, but right in terms of the cauldron movement. And that for me is a bit of a double-edged sword, because although it's great that it keeps the uptime really strong where everyone's playing it at the same time, you don't really have to worry about what too many other people are doing. So you know, for that reason, it scales very well. You know, from that 2 to 5 players, it's not really going to take much longer, no matter how many people you play this with. But when games work like that, I think skill level comes into this game quite a lot, and also like seat positioning. So if you're sat next to somebody who's maybe not such a gamer, isn't quite so up to scratch when it comes to these kind of conversion mechanisms, you're going to have a massive advantage over a person like that, where, you know, if you've got a really experienced Euro Q pusher kind of player, they're going to find it a lot easier to manage that system than somebody who isn't so experienced. Yeah, you can say that about a lot of games, but again, because I think this one you are particularly playing with one person, then that's going to massively sway who's going to win the game or not. The time investment of this game is generally good. You know, the box does say 30 minutes, and I would say, you know, just as often as not, it takes actually shorter than that. And that's, again, kind of a double-edged sword, because, again, you are only playing with that one person, and on your side of the table, you might be in a really gripping, tight game with, you know, and having that back and forth. Whereas on the other side of the table, then somebody's getting completely overwhelmed, they've got nothing they can do about it, and then the game suddenly ends really abruptly. There was nothing you could do about it, and it's simply a war between those particular players. So yeah, it's weird in that respect, where the game can feel very anticlimactic, because again, you are so engrossed in your game, and over there it's just ended and there's nothing you can do about it. You've had that kind of rug swept from under your feet, and it feels a bit anticlimactic when that happens. The replayability is so-so. I mean, for me personally, I wouldn't really go back to this one, because I think once you've done it, you've done it. There's not really much to explore. I think the biggest thing that's going to get this back to the table is how quick it is. They have made some efforts into, again, injecting some different player powers that you can choose to use. You know, you've got like characters like this that let you convert mandrakes into, you know, the book ability. Or this one here says, after passing recipe cards, you must rotate this card. So each time you've got your own kind of personal ability there, we can convert frogs into mushrooms. So there is, again, a little bit of effort there to be made to these different characters, which I suppose is appreciated, but I don't think it's going to massively change anyone's mind when it comes to the replayability. From an aesthetics and production standpoint, I think the game looks fantastic. I really do like this artist, Weberson Santiago. He's got a great art style, very unique. I think he's a brilliant artist. He's made games such as The Bloody Inn. I think this is a really, really standout and, you know, striking art style that I think is brilliant. All the components themselves are good. You know, of course, you've just got your standard wooden Euro cubes, which are fine. They're nice and bright. The cauldrons themselves are good. You know, they're a nice prop, but not they're a good kind of standout piece, but not overly done. So I think it does strike a nice balance of being a nice, well-presented product, but without being overdone and superfluous. So yeah, I've got no issues at all with the production. So, final thoughts on Whirling Witchcraft. So, first off, I think I have to give it props for being unique. I can't think of any single game that plays quite like this. I mean, where you're trying to constantly, sieve out the crap from your bench and give it to your opponent on your right. That's quite cool, and it has a very different feel to anything else out there. I like how quick this game is. It only takes 30 minutes maximum, really. And it has a great job of scaling. You can really play that 5-player count without adding too much time at all on to the actual timestamp of the game. I do like some of the potential to convert things into other things, and you can get these cool kind of networks and chains going. But ultimately, you kind of react to what you've got, and the decisions are fairly obvious because, if you have too many blues, you want to be converting blues into other stuff to try and keep your workbench down as much as you can. So despite having some pretty interesting chains here, it is pretty obvious what you want to do, and I do feel like sometimes the luck comes into it plays too much of a factor, because, as I said, if you struggle with a certain type and you don't draw a card to get rid of that type, and your opponent can produce a lot of it, then all of a sudden you're overwhelmed and the game is over. So yeah, unfortunately I wanted to like this one much more than I did in actuality. I think it's okay at best. Again, I didn't quite find the game satisfying. Before you get anything going, it's over, and sometimes you've got, again, no control over that. So yeah, I appreciate what this game does, but it's not one for me, unfortunately. I think there's a lot better family weight games out there, despite this one being unique. So I think there is definitely a crowd for it out there. People who don't really mind that balancing issue of who you sat next to is going to massively impact on the game. But yeah, overall, it's just a bit of a miss for me, and it didn't quite hit the spot. So yeah, unfortunately, I cannot recommend Whirling Witchcraft. I just think there's too many other great family weight games out there.